Flames clawed at the night sky above the Ozark ridgeline, swallowing timber beams until the farmhouse collapsed inward with a groan like a dying animal. 3 young women stood at the tree line, their faces lit orange, their hands still wet with sweat and ash. This was not the first time the Ozarks had seen violence, but it was the first time it came from daughters against their own kin. If family could turn on family, what safety did any neighbor have? The year was 1859, and the Burrell homestead lay deep in the northern Arkansas hills. The family was considered modest but respectable. A father who raised hogs and corn, a mother known for her herb cures, and 6 children who worked the land in silence. The 3 eldest were the triplets, Ruth, Cora, and Eliza, 19 years old that spring. From birth, they unnerved the community. They spoke in half sentences only. The other understood, braided each other's hair with ritual precision, and disappeared into the woods for hours, returning with wildflowers woven into crowns. Neighbors whispered. Reverend Pike called them a mockery of the Trinity. Children hurled stones. By adolescence, the sisters stopped attending gatherings altogether. In the market town of Jasper, folks swore they felt watched when the triplets walked past, as though 3 pairs of eyes measured them from behind a single mask. The Burrell patriarch tried to keep them under his roof, but witnesses later recalled the way he shouted at them across Sunday dinner, voice cracking with unease rather than discipline. One traveler described the homestead in May of that year. Cabin shuttered tight, though sun was high, heard no music, no laughter, only the sound of 3 girls humming low like bees in a jar. Field note, May 12, 1859. The sisters' bond thickened into something impenetrable. They shared one cot in the loft rather than sleep in 3. They whispered through the night in a language pieced from Bible phrases and woodland lore. They carved symbols into the barn beams, circles interlocked, triangles pointing down. Their mother begged them to stop, but the marks multiplied. By midsummer, animals grew restless. The family's best sow was found stiff beside the trough. No wound, no struggle. Chickens refused to roost. A neighbor claimed he saw smoke rising from the holler one dawn and caught the scent of resin and sage drifting on the wind. What were the sisters burning in secret? August heat thickened the valley like wool. The Burrell family rarely traveled into town, but when they did, only the parents came. The triplets lingered behind, tending to their strange circles of stones in the yard. By harvest season, their father threatened to send them to kin in Missouri to break their stubborn spirits. He told a blacksmith in town, "They are not right in the head. If I cannot straighten them, the Lord must." The blacksmith remembered those words after the fire. On the evening of October 2nd, a storm pressed heavy clouds across the Ozarks. The Burrells ate early and retired to bed before 9. Hours later, shouts erupted. Smoke poured from the eaves. A neighbor across the ridge swore he heard the crack of an axe between the thunderclaps, though others dismissed it as a branch snapping in the wind. By the time dawn came, the cabin was ash. 6 bodies lay within, their outlines charred beyond recognition, but the triplets were nowhere to be found. Only footprints led away from the ruin, 3 sets, sinking deep into wet soil, vanishing into the pines. What did they carry with them into those woods? Guilt or something darker? The town gathered to sift the ashes. A scorched axe head was pulled from the rubble, half burned away. The coroner shook his head. He would later testify, none of the dead died by smoke alone. But no one dared speak the word murder aloud until Reverend Pike thundered it from his pulpit. Cain's curse walks thrice among us. The triplets were declared fugitives before the week ended. Yet search parties returned empty-handed. Trails vanished among limestone outcrops and caves that honeycombed the hills. The Ozarks seemed to shelter them, as though the land itself had conspired with their escape. But escape was only the beginning. The search parties moved through the mountains with dogs, lanterns, and shotguns. their voices echoing against cliffs slick with autumn rain. Men swore they'd flush the sisters out by dawn. But dawn came, then another, and another, without a single trace. Beyond those first 3 sets of footprints, the stakes deepened with each day they remained at large. If 3 young women could commit such a deed and vanish, who among the community was safe? October in the Ozarks carried a peculiar soundscape. Cicadas droned low in the trees. The distant creak of branches carried across valleys, and streams gurgled over limestone beds. Against this backdrop, the posses called their hounds and scanned the ground, but the pines stood silent, revealing nothing. Old Man Wilkes, a trapper, swore he saw them near the mouth of a cave 2 ridges east. He claimed they stared at him without fear, their hair damp with mist, their hands clasped together as if in prayer. He fired a warning shot, but when the smoke cleared, the sisters were gone, like shadows swallowed by rock. He told the sheriff. Most dismissed him as drunk, but the detail of clasped hands would be repeated in other accounts. At the general store, folk argued whether the girls had run north to Missouri or west to Indian Territory. A school teacher suggested they had drowned in the Buffalo River to escape judgment. Yet rumors tangled quickly. A farmhand swore his mule balked near the old mill, ears pinned back as if sensing something unseen. Another said he heard 3 voices singing in harmony from a hollow past midnight, an old hymn, though twisted in tone. Patterns began to unsettle the region. 3 sheep found dead on the Turner property. No sign of wolves. 3 children woke screaming the same night from different cabins, each claiming to have seen women peering through their window. And then, 3 carved stones left on the steps of the Jasper courthouse, each marked with the same interlocked circle design that once appeared on the Burrell barn beams. The sheriff sent men to guard his house after that. In late October, a tattered journal surfaced, carried to town by a peddler who claimed to have found it near the creek. The cover was scorched. Inside, cramped writing in a feminine hand. October 4th, 1859. He spoke of sending us away. Better we send him first. Ash for ash, blood for blood. No signature, only the repetition of 3 initials, R, C, and E. The community wrestled with what to believe. Were the triplets cunning murderers who planned their escape in advance, or desperate girls reacting in madness? As weeks passed, the absence of bodies stirred more fear than discovery might have. Fires burned in hearths across the valley, yet people whispered of the cold creeping closer. Hunters refused to range alone. Mothers kept children indoors after dusk. 3 witches in the woods, 1 newspaper printed, though the editor later retracted it under pressure from the sheriff. Fear became habit. On November 12th, at a barn raising near the river, fiddles played and whiskey flowed. Laughter dulled the memory of the murders, until, without warning, every horse in the corral began to rear and kick, eyes rolling white. The music halted. Amid the sudden silence, 3 stones clattered onto the packed earth, tossed from the dark. No one saw who threw them. The barn stood half-finished as families scattered home, unwilling to work under what they now called the triplet shadow. What force kept the sisters hidden, yet present enough to be felt? In private, some neighbors admitted they half-sympathized. The Burrell patriarch had a reputation for severity. Whispers of lashings, of daughters punished in ways that left no visible marks. But to sympathize was dangerous. One man who suggested aloud that maybe the girls had reason found himself driven out of town within a week. The community needed its villains. What would you have done had you seen smoke rise from that cabin? Would you have run for help or stood back, letting the fire consume the story no one wanted told? By December, winter pressed down on the Ozarks. Snow softened the ridges, and the case grew colder. But fear remained, a frost inside every home. Families nailed charms to door frames. Preachers thundered against female disobedience. And always, the number 3 carried weight. 3 unclaimed graves lay in the Jasper Cemetery that winter, dug by mistake when townsfolk expected to find the sisters' bodies. Empty earth, filled with snow. 3 empty graves, yet the sisters' presence refused burial. Miners working a shaft near Marble Falls claimed they found chalk drawings on the rock wall triangles within circles, still fresh despite no footprints in the dust. A midwife swore she saw the girls watching from the ridge as she delivered a child in a cabin. Not flesh, she whispered later, but figures pale as smoke. What were they becoming out there? Untethered from hearth and law. By spring, the Ozarks would have its answer, or something like it. Snow melted into mud, and by March of 1860, the Ozarks came alive again, with woodpecker knocks, the sour scent of damp cedar, and the rough texture of thawed earth under boot. Farmers returned to their fields, but even in the thaw, the community could not shake the feeling that the triplets had only gone deeper underground, like roots waiting to rise. The stakes now stretched beyond the Burrell name. Whispers claimed the sisters had sworn a pact never to be taken alive, never to be separated, never to leave the mountains that birthed them. If true, their story wasn't over. It was only shifting shape. Sheriff Dobbs pressed forward with fresh searches once the roads cleared. His men combed the caves with lanterns, smoke blackening their hands on jagged rock. In one cavern, they discovered a nest of straw, 3 half-burned candles, and a length of braided hair looped around a stone. A kind of altar, one deputy muttered, though none dared linger. The sheriff ordered the items destroyed, but the men ignored him. Instead, they left the cavern quickly, as though chased by something breathing at their backs. Down in Jasper, Reverend Pike thundered from the pulpit. 3 daughters of Eve have bound themselves to Lucifer. The hills themselves hide their sin. Congregants nodded, though some secretly wondered, if the hills hid them, was it God or the land that granted shelter? Anecdotes multiplied. In April, a tanner swore his dogs whined at the edge of the pine barrens, refusing to follow 3 barefoot prints pressed into the clay. In May, a letter arrived from Springfield, claiming 3 women in dark shawls had purchased kerosene under false names. The sheriff rode north, only to return empty-handed. Then came June, and with it, the story of the Whitaker boy. He was 13, sent to gather wood near the river at dusk. When he failed to return, his mother searched and found him shivering on the bank, clutching an axe he swore he'd never seen before. On its handle, carved deep, were 3 initials, R, C, and E. When asked what happened, he stammered, "They told me to remember." But who was remembering who? Neighbors grew divided. Some insisted the sisters had perished long ago, and it was only fear fueling stories. Others claimed the triplets walked freely among them in disguise, veiled at church, cloaked at market, buying salt and flour under borrowed names. More chilling were those who suggested the triplets no longer needed disguises at all, that they moved unseen, their pact transforming them into something more myth than flesh. By midsummer, the fear became ritual. At the county fair, folks refused to enter contests in 3s, 3 pies, 3 quilts, 3 roosters for judging. A farmer burned his own corn crib because he found 3 crows perched upon it at dawn. 3 again, always 3. July brought a revelation. A forgotten witness emerged. Thomas Keller, a mill hand who admitted he'd seen the sisters on the night of the fire. He claimed he'd been down by the creek when the cabin flames rose, and in the flicker, he saw the triplets walk hand in hand from the house, axes lowered, clothes smeared with soot. Keller admitted he froze, too afraid to move. "I could have shouted," he confessed, "could have run for town. But something in their eyes stopped me, looked at me like they knew me better than I knew myself." He paused in his statement before adding, "What would you have done?" Keller's testimony split the county. Some branded him a coward for failing to stop them. Others muttered he was wise not to interfere, that perhaps the sisters carried God's own judgment against their father. But in private, families whispered the more dangerous thought. If Keller had acted, would the rest of them now be safer? Or had he saved them all by letting the triplets go on their way? That summer, 3 barns burned across different ridges within the span of 1 month. No one saw who struck the sparks, but every family swore they smelled the same resin and sage in the air. Sheriff Dobbs rode hard to investigate, but his horse collapsed from exhaustion on the 3rd fire, breaking its leg. The sheriff shot it by the roadside. Even Law bowed under the weight of 3. By August, the sisters had not been seen in nearly a year. Still, new stories surfaced. A trader passing through claimed he met 3 women on a ridge path at dusk. They asked if he feared the dark. He said no, though his voice quavered. They smiled, all at once, then melted into the trees. When he looked down, he realized his boots had sunk into damp earth that showed no footprints but his own. What pact had been sealed in those woods, and what had it turned them into? As harvest approached again, fear twisted into something like endurance. Neighbors adapted. They left offerings at crossroads: 3 coins, 3 kernels of corn, 3 nails driven into posts. They avoided saying the sisters' names after sundown. And when children asked why, mothers hushed them, saying only, "Because the mountains listen." Yet the mountains did more than listen. They remembered, and before winter came again, the sisters would remind the valley they were not gone, only waiting. Autumn returned to the Ozarks in 1860, and with it came the sharp snap of dry leaves underfoot, the smell of wood smoke curling from chimneys, and the rough feel of frost beginning to cling to window panes. Life in Jasper staggered back into rhythm: corn harvests, church socials, barter at the general store. But beneath the ordinary, the memory of the triplets pressed down like a low ceiling. By now, the stakes had shifted from a manhunt to a haunting. The question was no longer where the sisters had gone, but what they had become. The burial land, once a modest homestead, lay abandoned. Weeds pushed through the blackened foundation stones. Locals swore no birds landed there, and hunters avoided the place even when deer were plentiful. On October 2nd, the anniversary of the fire, a group of young men dared each other to camp on the site. They carried whiskey, fiddles, and bravado. By midnight, their laughter echoed off the hills, and then it stopped. One of the men later testified that a low humming filled the clearing, steady and 3-toned. Like 3 bees caught in glass, he said. The fire snapped, though no wind stirred. Out of the darkness, 3 shapes appeared at the tree line, pale as moonlight. He swore they didn't walk, so much as drift. The men fled, abandoning their whiskey and fiddles in the ashes. At dawn, those items were found neatly arranged in a triangle, strings cut, bottle emptied, its cork jammed into the dirt. An oath renewed, the Reverend declared when told the story. The pact lives still. But what was the oath? And to whom had it been sworn? A schoolteacher, Miss Larkin, proposed a different view. She noted that the sisters had been mocked for their closeness, scorned for keeping to each other. Perhaps, she told her pupils in hushed tones, their only oath was to never let the world divide them. For that remark, she nearly lost her post. Parents claimed she was poisoning children with sympathy. Yet her words lingered, quietly retold in kitchens and barns. Was the horror born from hatred or from love? The community refused to understand. Pattern interrupts began again. 3 wells across the county soured at once in mid-October, the water reeking of sulfur. 3 women miscarried within the same week, each claiming they dreamed of a fire that would not die. And a woodcutter found 3 axes propped against a pine, their blades clean but their handles marked with strange runes. 3 again, always 3. In November, a farmer named Caldwell vanished while hauling corn to town. His wagon was found near the river, wheels half submerged. The oxen stood unharmed. reins slack. On the wagon seat lay a scrap of cloth wool, dark blue, sewn with a crooked hem, like something stitched in haste. The sheriff's deputy swore he recognized it. Years earlier, he had seen the same fabric used in the dresses the Burrell triplets wore on Sundays. But Caldwell's body was never found. The fear became suffocating. Families barred their doors at dusk. Children were scolded for humming. Even the dogs grew restless, howling at nothing visible. A miner remarked, "This ain't fear of people no more. This is fear of covenant." The Ozarks in that season felt like a land under oath, and yet not all who felt the presence of the sisters recoiled. In the holler near Pruitt, a widow named Hester claimed the triplets visited her cabin one stormy night. They said nothing, only stood at the doorway until she offered bread and water. They ate silently, then left, leaving behind 3 wildflowers laid on her table. Hester swore the flowers did not wilt for weeks. "They meant no harm to me," she told her neighbors. They only wished to be remembered. Her testimony divided the town further. Some said she lied for attention. Others muttered she had struck her own pact with them. Her cabin was burned before Christmas. Enablement through silence. What would you have done? Had 3 pale figures appeared at your door, turned them away, or fed them bread? As the year waned, the Ozark nights lengthened. Stars blazed above the ridges, but down in the valleys, darkness pooled thick and deep. Folks swore they heard 3 voices weaving hymns into the wind. Lanterns swung from porches, yet the shadows always seemed to hold more weight than light. By New Year's, the county had stopped speaking of capture altogether. The sisters were no longer fugitives in the eyes of the law. They had become something else, an oath echoing through pine and stone, carried in every fearful glance at the number 3. And soon, that oath would demand more than silence. Spring of 1861 came with the hollow sound of woodpeckers echoing across empty hollers, the damp smell of thawed moss and rot, and the grit of pollen blowing through every crack in the cabins. Life pushed forward, but with every new season, the absence of the triplets seemed less like an end and more like a waiting. By now, the stakes had spread from a single family's tragedy into a county-wide dread. The Burrell sisters had become a measure of time itself before the fire and after. On March 17th, a drifter passing through Jasper stopped at the crossroads near Mill Creek. He later told the sheriff he found 3 stones stacked there in a neat pyramid, blackened as if pulled from fire. Scrawled in charcoal across the dirt was a phrase, "Ash for ash." 2 days later, a pig farmer found his best sow dead at the trough. No wound, no sign of sickness. Carved into the wood above the stall were the initials R, C, and E. Neighbors muttered of curses, but Sheriff Dobbs dismissed it as copycat mischief. He ordered the graffiti scraped clean, but the very next week, 3 more farmers reported the same initials, carved into fence posts, flour sacks, and even into a church pew. 3 again, always 3. Then came the disappearance of Reverend Pike's niece. Her name was Martha, 16 years old, known for carrying hymn books to the church each Sunday. She vanished after an evening prayer meeting in April. Her bonnet was found hanging on a branch along the road, tied in 3 knots. The Reverend thundered that the Burrell sisters had returned to claim the innocent. Families gathered in the churchyard, clutching lanterns as Pike declared, "This is not a matter of flesh and blood. This is a covenant of evil, and it will claim us one by one, unless broken." But there was no body, no proof, only rumor. Some whispered that Martha had run off with a boy from Missouri, and the sisters were only a convenient cloak for scandal. Others insisted she had been taken into the hills by 3 pale figures who fed on loyalty and fear alike. One question hung over every conversation. If the sisters were still out there, why had no one caught them? A miner named Tilson provided a chilling clue. In May, while traveling home late, he swore he saw a figure standing at the crossroads thin, with hair hanging long and tangled. As he approached, 2 more shapes stepped out from the trees. They stood shoulder to shoulder, silent. Tilson raised his lantern. He swore the 3 pairs of eyes reflected light, not like human pupils, but like glass. He fled without looking back. He told the sheriff, but no posse was sent. Men fear a rifle in daylight, Tilson said later, but no posse will march against what they think is covenant. By midsummer, the sisters' legend grew teeth. 3 barns burned in 3 different valleys in the span of 9 days, always at midnight, always leaving behind small piles of stones shaped like triangles. Farmers rebuilt in silence, but each fire fed the story that the Burrell triplets demanded offerings. At the general store, an old woman from Newton County whispered, "They take what is not given." In June, Jasper held its first public inquest into the murder since the fire. Witnesses retold their accounts: smoke, footprints, Keller's frozen silence. But instead of clarity, the proceedings fed more speculation. A local juror stood and asked aloud, "If they swore never to be taken, do we chase women or do we chase their oath?" The courtroom fell silent. No verdict was reached. Enablement through silence. And then, in July, the missing girl returned. Martha Pike staggered into her uncle's yard at dawn, barefoot and pale. She carried no bonnet, only a scrap of fabric clutched in her fist, dark wool, sewn with a crooked hem. When pressed, she said she remembered nothing but voices in harmony, guiding her through the dark. She claimed the sisters never harmed her, only whispered, "Remember us." In France, the Reverend forbade her from speaking further, but word spread quickly. Some believed her testimony proved the sisters were protectors, not predators. Others saw it as proof of possession. Which truth was worse? By autumn, the county divided itself in 2. Half the families nailed iron charms above their doors, vowing to resist. The other half left offerings at the crossroads: bread, coins, scraps of ribbon in hopes of mercy. And every dusk, 3 shadows seemed to linger longer than the rest. The crossroads became their altar, but what covenant was being kept, and how long would it demand blood? The autumn of 1861 bled into a winter that came late but hard. Snow pressed against the ridges, wind cut through cedar groves like a knife, and every footstep crunched on frozen ground. Still, the stories of the triplets carried louder than the crack of ice on the Buffalo River. By this point, the stakes reached beyond Jasper or Newton County. Travelers spread tales of the Burrell sisters across Arkansas and into Missouri, each version darker than the last. To some, they were murderers hiding in caves. To others, they were witches, bound by pact to an ancient oath. The absence of proof only multiplied the versions, and each retelling made the sisters more myth than flesh. But in the valleys nearest the old Burrell land, the fear had texture. It showed up in the way men checked the corners of barns before shutting doors. It lingered in the sour smell of herbs hung in kitchens, charms against unseen visitations, and it pressed heavy in the sound that neighbors swore they heard when the wind carried just right. 3 voices, weaving in low harmony, like hymns sung through stone walls. The hollow choir, folks began calling it. It started in November. A miller riding home after dark claimed he heard singing rise from the holler below him. The song was familiar, Rock of Ages, but warped, sung in a minor key. When he returned the next morning to search, he found 3 wooden crosses hammered into the ground beside the creek. No tracks in the frost. In December, a widow reported the same. The sound of voices came through her window at midnight, and when she looked outside, 3 figures stood in her yard, hands clasped, swaying with the hymn. She fainted, and when she woke, the yard was empty, except for 3 strands of braided hair left on her doorstep. What power did the sisters carry now? Human rage, or something more? Primary source entries soon appeared in county files. December 12, 1861. Complaint by Elias Moore. Voices in the night. Neighbor claims same. Animals refuse water from lower spring. Belief is that the triplets have cursed the holler, requesting patrol, but no patrol came. Part of the dread lay in complicity. The bystanders knew, and they chose silence. A blacksmith admitted to a friend that he had seen 3 cloaked figures walk past his forge at dusk, their steps crunching ice. He turned away, pretending not to notice. "What would you have done?" he asked, voice thin. By January, children in Jasper were playing a new game. They called it Three Sisters. One child would stand at the center of a circle, eyes closed, while 3 others whispered in her ears at once. If she guessed the words, she lived. If she failed, she burned. Parents tried to stop the game, but it spread like wildfire. Even the youngest had absorbed the legend. Fear had become inheritance. Meanwhile, material traces surfaced. A farmer digging a ditch near Pruitt unearthed a small bundle wrapped in cloth, 3 rusted nails, 3 feathers, and a scrap of paper with the initials R, C, and E scratched in soot. He buried it again without telling his wife. Weeks later, his barn collapsed under snow. He whispered to neighbors that perhaps he had offended the sisters by disturbing their sign. 3 again, always 3. Not every encounter ended in fear. In February, a girl named Clara, 9 years old, wandered too far into the woods. She claimed 3 women found her, warmed her hands by their fire, and gave her cornbread. When she returned home, she carried 3 wildflowers tucked into her hair, though snow still blanketed the ground. Mercy, or manipulation? The school teacher, Miss Larkin, asked her pupils after hearing the tale. What do you believe? Her words nearly cost her position again. The hollow choir grew louder with spring. On March 3rd, 3 separate households reported hearing the same hymn at the same hour, 10:30 p.m. Abide with me. Drawn out, notes lingering like smoke. Men carried rifles into the woods the next night, but the song never came when they listened. Only when they returned to their cabins, doors latched, did the voices resume. What were the sisters becoming out there in the dark? Women on the run? Or something no longer bound by flesh? The sheriff refused to file more complaints, calling them hysteria. Yet privately, his deputy confided to a clerk that he, too, had heard the voices one night while patrolling the ridge. Not human, he said. Not entirely. The land itself seemed changed. Travelers described fog rising in perfect triangles from the river. Farmers swore seeds sprouted in 3s, 3 stalks where one should grow. Even the stars above Jasper were red as omen, constellations twisting into trios. By April, 2 years had passed since the fire, yet the sisters' shadow stretched further than ever. They had moved from fugitives to covenant, from covenant to choir, and the song was not finished. The spring of 1862 arrived with the sound of frogs calling from swollen creeks, the metallic scent of rain-soaked earth, and the rough bark of oak trees shedding last year's scars. Yet even as the Ozarks burst green again, the people of Jasper lived as though beneath a pall. The Burrell triplets had not been seen clearly in more than 2 years, but their legend rang louder than church bells. By now, the stakes were no longer measured in lives lost, but in truth suppressed. If the sisters were still alive, then every silence, every denial, every witness who turned away had been part of keeping them free or keeping them feared. One such witness finally broke. In May of that year, a man named Henry Brewer arrived in court on an unrelated property dispute. His hand shook as he testified about land boundaries, but then, unprompted, he blurted, "I saw them. I saw the triplets." The room went still. Brewer claimed that in the autumn of 1860, while cutting timber, he had come upon 3 women kneeling in a circle near a fallen oak. They were whispering in unison, their hands laid flat on the trunk as though listening to the dead wood breathe. He swore one turned and looked at him, not startled, but calm like she had been expecting him. And what did Brewer do? He lowered his axe, turned back toward his mule, and left. He never reported it. "Why?" the judge asked. Brewer's reply, "Because I reckon they weren't meant to be caught, and maybe they weren't ours to catch." What would you have done? His admission was met with outrage. Some called for his arrest as accomplice. Others muttered that he was only saying aloud what many had chosen privately. The land itself had closed around the sisters, and no sheriff or court could pry them out. That summer, a rash of new incidents fed the unease. 3 fishing boats overturned on the Buffalo River within a single week. All the men survived, but each reported hearing singing just before their boats capsized. When they righted themselves on shore, they found 3 cairns of stacked stone waiting at the waterline. 3 again. Always 3. In June, Reverend Pike fell ill. His fever left him raving, calling out the names Ruth, Cora, and Eliza in the night. Congregants whispered that the sisters had cursed him for branding them a mockery of the Trinity. When he died by July, his niece Martha claimed she heard 3 women singing outside the window as his last breath left. By August, crops in 3 fields withered despite rain, while every other farm thrived. Families began leaving Jasper, abandoning cabins rather than live under the shadow of covenant. A census taken that fall recorded 30 fewer households than the year before, and still, the hollow choir sang. A school teacher traveling through wrote in her diary, August 22nd, 1862, lodged near Jasper, awoke in the night to sound of 3 voices, not song as much as weaving of notes, low and high together. Child and household whispered, "It's the sisters." They all believed it without question. Fear was no longer the only response. A small but growing number began to treat the sisters as guardians. In September, 3 children lost in the woods returned safely, claiming women had guided them to a trail. Each child carried a wildflower tucked into their pocket. Mercy or manipulation? The divide cut deep. On one side, preachers and sheriffs condemned the sisters as murderers who had evaded justice. On the other, families whispered that perhaps the sisters had only destroyed what destroyed them first. And beneath both camps lay the deeper silence, the knowledge that witnesses, like Henry Brewer and perhaps many others, had enabled this survival through looking away, through keeping their tongues still when their hearts pounded. Enablement through silence. The triplets had been 19 when they raised axes against their kin. By now, they would be 22. 3 years of absence had ripened them into something more than women on the run. They had become the Ozark's most dangerous inheritance, not bodies to be hunted, but voices woven into the land itself. As the war between North and South raged further east, the Ozark community fought its own quieter battle, whether to remember the sisters as monsters, martyrs, or something in between. By winter, one truth had become inescapable. Silence had not buried them. Silence had only made them sing louder, and the song was about to reach its crescendo. The winter of 1862 bore down on the Ozarks, with brittle winds that whistled through hollow logs, the sharp smell of pine resin burning in stoves, and the sting of frostbitten rope against wagon hands. The Civil War marched across Arkansas, but in Jasper, whispers of the triplets still outshouted news of Union and Confederate skirmishes. By now, the stakes had widened into legacy. The question was not only whether Ruth, Cora, and Eliza Burrell still lived, but what their story meant for those who came after. Were they fugitives who slipped through the cracks of law, or had they become something woven into the fabric of the land itself? The last wave of sightings came that winter. In December, a Confederate deserter stumbled into town, half-starved. He told of hiding in a limestone cave near the Buffalo River. There, he claimed, he found 3 women seated around a fire, their faces shadowed, their hands clasped as they sang in low harmony. They offered him bread without a word. When dawn broke, the deserter awoke alone, the ashes cold, but 3 smooth stones laid across his chest. Later that month, A woman named Abigail Collins swore she saw 3 figures walking hand in hand across a snowfield at dusk, their shawls trailing, leaving no footprints behind them. They weren't walking on the snow, she told neighbors. They were walking with it. January brought the most chilling report. A Union scout, stationed near Jasper, vanished during a patrol. His horse returned with saddle intact, reins wrapped 3 times around the horn. 3 days later, the scout staggered back to camp, lips blue, eyes unfocused. He never spoke again, but in his hand, clenched tight, were 3 strands of braided hair. 3 again. Always 3. Sheriff Dobbs tried one last search. Men rode out with rifles and lanterns, combing ridges and caves. They found only remnants: a circle of stones, blackened by fire, a strip of wool cloth, frayed at the hem, and an axe head buried in the dirt, its edge polished as though recently used. The sheriff brought the items back, but no man claimed them. The evidence sat locked in his office until it disappeared one stormy night. By spring of 1863, the sisters had vanished from all official records. No more sightings, no more testimony. Their story slipped into silence, as though the mountains themselves had closed over them. But silence does not always mean absence. Neighbors continued to whisper. Some claimed the sisters had been taken in by Cherokee families deeper in the hills, learning older rituals of earth and fire. Others insisted they drowned in the Buffalo River, their pact fulfilled by vanishing together. And a few believed the opposite, that they lived on, ageless, hidden among the ridges, surfacing only when the number 3 appeared in blood, in fire, in song. In Jasper, the burial land remained barren. No family ever rebuilt there. Hunters swore the soil stayed black, as if refusing grass. One witness, years later, left this note in a ledger. March 21st, 1880. Walked past old burial place. Thought I heard women singing. 3 voices. Same as when I was a boy. Some songs never leave a place. Legend tag. Even today, hikers in the Ozark hollers claim that on cold nights, when wind funnels through limestone caves, you can hear 3 voices braided together, singing a hymn no church ever taught. The war ended. Years fell like leaves. But the memory of the Burrell triplets clung to the Ozarks long after cannons fell silent. In courthouse archives, their names appeared only in fragments, burnt deeds, unsigned testimony, scraps of fabric pressed between yellowed pages. Official records preferred silence. Yet in kitchens, in fields, in night stories told by firelight, their legend deepened. The stakes had become generational. To speak of Ruth, Cora, and Eliza was no longer to hunt fugitives. It was to wrestle with what their story revealed about the valley itself, its cruelties, its silences, its complicity. By 1870, old-timers swore they could still trace the sisters' presence. Hunters claimed deer trails twisted into triangles near the abandoned Burrell homestead. Children dared each other to leave 3 stones stacked by the creek, and when those stones were scattered by morning, they ran home breathless, convinced the triplets had walked again in the night. In 1875, a visiting journalist from St. Louis collected local tales. His notes recorded, nearly every household has its own account. One farmer's wife insists the triplets knocked on her door during a blizzard, only to vanish when she opened it. A ferryman claims his rope snapped 3 times in a single night, the current carrying his skiff downstream. The pattern of 3 recurs so often it cannot be coincidence. Yet no one will state outright what they believe. They look at you, hesitate, and say, "The hills remember." Enablement through silence lingered. Entire generations chose not to question too closely what had happened in 1859. To speak plainly risked either justifying the sisters or condemning the community that shunned them. Safer, always, to let the story live in whispers. But the land itself bore witness. Travelers through the Buffalo River Valley described peculiar sensations, an unnatural hush before storms, the smell of smoke with no fire, the sudden harmony of 3 owls calling at once. Guides warned against whistling after dark. That's when you'll hear them answer, they said. Some claimed the sisters had not died at all, an oral tradition passed quietly among midwives and herbalists. Ruth, Cora, and Eliza were said to have transformed into the 3 shadows, women who walked between life and death, guarding the hollers from men who would harm women. These tellings softened the sisters into protectors, even saints of a sort. Others sharpened the tale into a warning. Preachers thundered that the sisters' pact proved what happened when daughters defied fathers, when women bound themselves to each other rather than to law or husband. For every hymn sung in their honor, another sermon branded them unholy. Which version is true, the protectors, the monsters, or something stranger? In 1889, a schoolteacher collecting folklore recorded a chilling rhyme children sang on the playground. 3 by fire, 3 by song, 3 will find where you belong. Say their names. They'll come in kind, but never meet them after 9. By then, even children who knew nothing of the Burrell family carried their echo. The dread line continued. Into the 20th century, locals still avoided the Burrell clearing. A surveyor mapping the area in 1902 wrote of campfires extinguishing themselves in the night, as if smothered by unseen hands. A hiker in 1924 reported hearing women laughing in harmony, though he traveled alone. In 1931, 3 men disappeared while hunting. Their rifles were found propped in a triangle against a cedar. 3 again. Always 3. The sisters had become more than story. They were pattern, covenant, and question woven into the Ozark Hills. And even now, hikers claim strange things. A smell of smoke on clear nights. Songs sung in chords that seem too perfect for echoes. Circles of stone left in riverbeds after floods. So what do the Ozarks remember? That 3 young women, bound by blood and secrecy, burned their own home to ash in 1859. That silenced neighbors' silence, witnesses' silence. The land's silence carried them further than law ever could. That what begins as tragedy can harden into legend, and legend into something still walking. Perhaps the sisters are gone, swallowed by river or ridge. Or perhaps they are not gone at all, but simply waiting, 3 shadows woven into the pine dark hollers, singing a hymn no one taught them. The hollow choir never truly ends. We're only scratching the surface. The next case is even darker. Subscribe before it drops.